Hello, I'm very happy to start this discussion and lecture with the title about the co-creation of public space, Katze und Krieg in conversation with Joanna Kusiak. My name is Aneta Rostkowska. I'm director of a CCA temporary gallery in Cologne. In this series of events, we are reflecting the artistic oeuvre of the performance duo Katze und Krieg from Cologne, that since many years are undertaking very unique performances in public space, questioning it, appropriating it, and inviting the random visitors, I would say, or random observers to interact with them. And for this series, we decided to work with different scholars to help us to understand better what's happening during the performances, and also to think about different themes that are being approached there, and maybe about possible ideas for future performances or new impulses and inspirations. And now I would like to introduce our guest to you. Joanna Kusiak is a junior research fellow at King's College, University of Cambridge, and also director of studies in geography at King's College. She's a sociologist, urban sociologist, specializing exactly in the issues that are important also for Katze und Krieg, public space, and how it works in different cities, in Warsaw, in Berlin, and also other ones. She currently her focus is on the role that law and legal systems play in shaping of the urban space. She's received numerous prizes and awards and grants, her PhD was published in Polish, and I think will be soon published in English. Chaos Warsaw Spatial Orders of the Polish Capitalism. I will. She is also an author of many book chapters and journal articles that are dedicated to public space. So we thought that this meeting, it is being recorded because of the specific funding regulations and the pandemic situation. We had to realize them in advance and record, but we still hope for feedback and discussions afterwards. We will start with input from Joanna, who told us that it's a more experimental one. We are really looking forward to it. And then Katze und Krieg will present selected performances they realized, and then later we will have a joint discussion. So Joanna, please, thank you for being here with us and dedicating your time.
Thank you. Thank you once again for the invitation. As I mentioned before in our informal discussion, I had lots of fun thinking about performances and urban space and trying to indeed discern what actually happens during those performances. And the title proposed for this lecture was the co-creation of public space during the performances or through the performances. And I think to ask this question, how do we create space? We have to go a step back and ask even a more basic question, what is space? What is space? And historically, of course, this question has been asked by physics. There's been a grand debate of modern physics and Big Ten with Einstein theory. And following this trend, there's been also a change of paradigm in social science that is often narrated as a spatial turn. And that was initiated by philosophers and sociologists, Lefebvre, Foucault, David Harvey, et cetera. But basically the key of this spatial turn is the rejection of this old notion that space is a passive container in which things happen, that it is some sort of container, we just put things into space and they're being ordered into space. That's what we believe now is not the case. And instead, we think of space in a more relational form. There's this relational notion of space as something that is not passive, but dynamic, that is a socially produced web of relationships. And this notion of space is interesting because also it dissolves these boundaries between space and object, because each object that before we would say is in space is in fact co-creating the space, and also dissolving the boundaries between space and subjects, because we as people also participate in creating the space. So what does it practically mean? I mean, it means that when we enter the room, we change this room, we transform this room. And intuitively, I think we all know it. And maybe even now, after a year of global pandemic, it became even more palpable. I mean, it's very obvious that once our cities became empty, they turned into different cities. The cities with no public in it, with no public gatherings, with no public interactions, turned immediately to different kind of spaces. And maybe this was the best graspable case or showcase of how people are co-producing cities. It's not just architecture, it's also what we do, so to say, between the buildings. And this approach of space as something that is relational inevitably also links space to power. Because if we all produce space, this is also a form of power that we have. As I said, when we enter the room, we change the room. And sometimes we can use this power intentionally. And it's also something that happens despite or even without our intentions. I mean, that's also something that probably it's easy to think in terms of experience and diversity. And every woman knows that if you're the only woman that enters a room full of men, if you want it or not, to change the dynamic, right? I mean, that's, if a Black person enters a room full of white people, there's something that immediately changes in the dynamic. So there's a power that happens both intentionally and not intentionally. And the question, of course, the big question is, how can we train ourselves into using this power more consciously, into expanding maybe this power and use it intentionally to produce certain types of spaces, maybe democratic spaces, inclusive spaces. But of course, it's not so easy because we're never the only ones producing spaces. We're always in this constant interaction with things that are already in this space, with some dynamics and logics that were set long before we came. And there's other people intervening in this space. So it's easy always to think on a small scale. And we know a dancer, let's say, dancing on a public square can totally change the square, can change the dynamic. But can this dancer really, let's say, end the housing crisis, right? I mean, that becomes more tricky, right? I mean, so I think the interesting political question is, we have this bodily capacity to change the space, but how can we really scale it up? And politically, that's been done also a lot. I mean, people have been using the bodies also to change the political system of cities and countries. And so this question about, can a dancer end the housing crisis? I mean, it might sound funny, but it's actually not a trivial question. Urban movements has been using for years people's bodies to block evictions, let's say, to occupy squares and places. And through the act of occupying a single bus seat, Rosa Parks changed the history of the civil rights movements, right? So that this bodily capacity, it's small scale, but in a way, it's also something to reckon with. It's something to think about in a way that is potentially scalable. So how can we use our bodily capacity to produce space that really transform the system? And can we do it also for other ways than protest? Because protest is often the most obvious example. I mean, the gathering of bodies in public space, especially if it's a lot of bodies that's been traditionally the biggest performative way of trying to influence the dynamic in a most more sustainable political long-term way. And yeah, I mean, how can we really scale it up? And this approach, when we think in terms of theory and research, in a way combines the phenomenological approach, the fact that through the body as physical objects we produce the space, and big structural theories of capitalism by David Harvey or Henri Lefebvre that also show that, you know, Lefebvre actually coined this notion of social production of space, and it was very intentionally linking the structural analysis of capitalism with a more small-scale bodily or embodied practices of producing space. So yeah, so two questions that I think are most important in terms of this performances, or the ones that came to my mind, is that the first question is, how can we increase our power in producing space? And can we really consciously, intentionally train ourselves in producing and transforming urban spaces through our bodies? And I think in some way that is what you've been doing. I mean, there's some, I see also this performances also some sort of training of the capacity of producing space. When I think about your performance Playing Around, where you really take the city and turn it into a play space, really go for this idea that is always there in the city, actually, of city as a potential space where a lot can happen, where spontaneous interactions can occur, but also something that is free, that is unbound, that through the multiplicity of objects and people and situation can produce this playful dynamic, which is also the very core of creativity. So that's the one aspect. The second question that in a way arises from turning this first question around is, if on the one hand, we have this capacity of producing space, of transforming space as people, how does urban space in interaction, through interaction with us, also transforms our inner space? Because also psychologically, if we think about how notion of space has been used, I mean, of course, the first impulse is always to think about physical spaces such as cities, but we also have a big tradition in clinical psychology stemming from Donald Winnicott and Thomas Ogden, so actually the classics of child development psychology, also narrating this inner space and the capacity of holding space between the subjects and capacity of expanding, or they're describing how the infant is developing some kind of inner space through interaction with mother, through interaction with the environment. And of course, then we can scale it up into interactions with urban spaces and with public spaces. And of course, urban space, a city, it is very, very interesting space to play with or to use for also inner development. That's why also traditionally artistic practices are more often linked to cities than, let's say, to rural landscape or to countryside, precisely because of this potential of city as a very dense intersubjective space where a lot can happen. I mean, Georg Simmel described the modern city as a place with an overload of stimuli, the possibility of meeting strangers, very important, right? I mean, that we constantly exposed to a lot of different people where we cannot for sure know what to expect. But also this allows us to present a public persona and to play with one's own identity. Whereas in the countryside, often we have a prescribed identity by way to which social group we belong. In the city, we can really play with it, and in a way, living in the city or being in the public space of the city can be seen as a game of hiding oneself and revealing oneself, because we can narrate oneself, we can create oneself through fashion, through how we behave. We could theoretically be a new person every day, because these identities are not imposed on us. Of course, with ideally, because we know this is also a sort of luxury that is not granted to everyone, and one definitely needs to add that this is the core of, let's say, racism or any form of prejudice, is that even within urban environments, some people are taking away this possibility to be anyone, and they're constantly being pushed to some sort of identities that are being expected because they look certain ways, and there's this constant move to try to push them into certain identities. So also this idea of full freedom granted by urban space is not evenly distributed, right? I mean, it's also not there for everyone. And nonetheless, there's still, probably for everyone, there's still at least a little bit more of it than in a very small rural environment where things are a little bit more set. So in the cities, we can curate ourselves because we are strangers to others. And through this curating oneself, we can also try to expand our inner freedom and expand our inner spaces. So from this perspective, I suspect that performative art offers also some sort of liberation, because the performance, as I see it, also as I saw the recordings of your performance, is also about playing out in the public the more suppressed identities that are still our identities, but that maybe don't come through in the everyday level. And there's this liberation of really throwing them onto the public, breaking maybe some social norms that I mean, some of those norms are external, some of those norms might be internal, something that just we ourselves maybe wouldn't dare in the normal situation, but then performance and arts offer this opportunity to transform it. And here I think in particular, of two of your performances. One is Release Your Inner Animality, which is precisely about that, right? I mean, we all have some animal in us. I mean, human being is in the end an animal, which means being wild, screaming, being aggressive, all the things that might be not so welcome in the daily so-called civilized human interaction, but nonetheless, they are there. And through your performance, the way I see it, is you're trying to release it, to throw it onto the public, and through that maybe to expand the space of what is possible, and both internally and externally, both in the city, what is possible in urban space, but also internally, it's, as Michel Foucault maybe would say, it's some sort of technique of the self, because I can imagine, and of course you will tell me because it's your experience, but I can imagine that there's a great sense of liberation connected to it, and also, yeah, and also of self-discovery, of discovering this inner animality. I can roar, I can throw myself onto the fence, I can do all these things. And you know, here we can also think about norms and gendered norms, and the way we can use these artistic forms to overcome it. And the second performance also that I will show, Before We Die, again, it's more now maybe projected into the future, but it's also about this releasing some kind of secret wishes, or things that, I mean, one of you I think kissed a random person on the street, right? I mean, so some things that are also not obvious or not socially acceptable to keep doing the everyday level. And this form of art and of performance allows, again, to expand the urban space, expand the inner space, and to create some new set of creative possibility and potentially empowered. So from all of this, I came to some sort of, if I were to wrap up my thinking in some kind of one sort of statement, I see that the freedom that comes from performative art, internally speaking, is about creating the ability to become crazy while holding on to one's reason at the same time. So being crazy while holding on to one's reason means, on the one hand, developing the freedom of a crazy man. Because the crazy person in the public space, as we know, is the person who really just lets go of these norms, right? And can walk naked through the city, scream, roar, and just is not bothered by this norms. And while we, the society, trying to impose the norms, we're spontaneously almost afraid often of crazy people because they are unpredictable. We don't know what they do. I think it's important also to realize that this fear is ours, not theirs. I mean, the internal freedom of the crazy persons that they actually genuinely don't care about the social norms. So if we are ashamed watching the crazy person, it's our shame. It's not their shame. They're actually just expressing something without doing it. But then the second component is being crazy while also holding on to one's reason, because of course the aim is also not to just become a crazy person in the full terms of this term. I mean, this is not sustainable and potentially dangerous also. But holding on one's reasons means being fully present to what's happening, able to take it in and make choices on the way, being able to stop any moment, but stop not out of shame, but out of choice, and also stop. But that also means that one could stop, and not just also by being driven by the inertia, neither inertia of reason nor the inertia of being crazy, right? It's about trying to holding on this power of capacity and deciding in every moment what kind of space do we create in a given moment, internally and externally, and why, and do we want to continue, and do we want to stop? And how does art help to train this muscle? And the thing is, of course, that art allows to do it because it provides also sort of space of convention. Because, being fully honest, of course, it is probably easier for you to do it as performative artist and not as just two people under your name just randomly. So, I mean, so the setup of the performance, the fact that there is public, that there's often some institution that is supporting it, there's someone recording, there's public. So there are all like little hints dropped to people in the city and to police, of course, too, because you could get arrested, I mean, if you go all crazy, that this is something that again is socially acceptable because we accept art as a social convention. So the art provides some kind of protective bubble where you can go fully crazy, at the same time be protected. And on this interaction between craziness and protection, there's this slow expanding of the possibilities of the urban space. And so maybe the final question that I would have, and of course, because you have this protective bubble, because you have also the label of being an artist, that is why it is often so hard for the public to join, because they not live this label, they're not artists, so they don't have neither outer nor inner permission to go crazy in the public space. But at the same time, they're often tempted by what you're doing, right? So there's again this slowly like pulling, pushing move of, can I enter this space of art? Can I be pulled into this dynamic? Would it be safe for me? I'm not an artist in the end, but at the same time, it is part of art, so why not? And there's this constant push and pull, and in this way, this spaces of potentiality, again, internal and external, are being expanded. And so the last question that I started to ask was, what would happen if one tried to get rid also of this convention of the performance, and just do those things, but without this entourage of official performance and visible recording, visible public? Would it destroy the art, or would it maybe bring the art into even higher level, where the convention, even the convention of art is not anymore needed? I mean, what kind of opening would it allow? I don't know. I mean, this is genuinely a question that I want to throw it, but something that I get curious about. And maybe also to bring it into discussion, I have 2 questions for you. First is, how do you come out with the ideas for your performances? What's your usual process? I mean, why these actions and not other actions? Like, what's the, do you have some sort of procedure? Is it spontaneous coming to ideas, or does it emerge also from some situations? And the second is more of a wish, like inspired by the Before We Die performance, you know, like some sort of wish that maybe I want to express too before I die, as a researcher, not an artist. But I would actually love to participate in one performance with you, or maybe devise a performance with you, or try to do something and join your collective for one time, so to say, and come up with a performance that would precisely try to push those boundaries. Of course, if you agree. I mean, if inviting random otherness includes researchers, then I'd be happy to join a performance, or even co-create a performance one time, joining the collective Katze und Krieg. And I was been thinking as a dog, then definitely. I mean, if it's Katze und Krieg, that would be Katze, Hund und Krieg. So yeah, so that's my input. Thank you, and I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Joanna, for your very insightful interpretation, and great that you also really also referred to the performances. Fantastic. So Julia and Katarina, now it's time for your presentation.
I will continue right now, and yeah, like you both know very well our works we are talking about, but our future audience, hopefully, which will watch our lecture right now, don't know these works. So I will, I will present one work. I will start with Before We Die, and then Katarina will go on lecturing about release your animality, and then finally I will also show a bit of playing around. So there's a little repetition maybe for you, but I hope it's fine that I present this also for others. And afterwards we will come back to your questions and your thoughts and discuss about it. I will start with Before We Die. It is the oldest work I will present, and this work was developed in 2010. And this was a time of a transition for us, as we were finishing our studies and somehow started to get more professional artists. And it was also a time where we were up to starting a new life full of wishes, because like the old structure of studying was finishing, and then like, okay, what is a new direction of what I will do in the future was a little bit the question. So a little bit the theme of the performance was also the theme of our life in these days. Like, yeah, we focused on everything we still want to experience and do before we die. Yeah. For this performance, we collaborated with a local bus transport company, and they supported us with a bus and a bus driver. And our audience was invited to sit in the bus. And as you see here on the picture, there's also a little band we engaged to play some music during our tour. And we talked in microphones, and these microphones were connected to the audio system of the bus. So we had a very high quality audio. And after a little music intro, while we were in the bus, it started to drive. And we both started to brainstorm about our personal wishes we wanted to fulfill before we die. For example, before I die, I had the wish to give a music concert as a rock star, for example. Or before I die, I want to do something very meaningful, like things like that. And the bus started to drive very slowly, and and it continued to drive when we arrived at the pedestrian area. So it drove through the pedestrian area and the shopping area even of the city. So in a way, already the bus itself became an intervention, and lots of passers-by were like looking disturbed at it. And then in a central square in the shopping area, we stopped finally. And we both looked at each other's eyes and committed to one wish. And then there's this moment of we step out of the bus, and we both wrote our wish on the window of the bus. And it was a little bit like a promise. On this, after a brainstorm of lots of wishes, like on this wish, I will concentrate right now. And now we used like audio transmitters to bring all our words, what we say, but also what passers-by says, into the bus. And yeah, so also the microphone is more in front, so also the words of the passers-by are transmitted. So in a way, the public space became a stage, while the bus itself became a mobile audience tribune. And in a way, the random passers-by became, in a way, actors. And we ourselves get into our actions. Our goal was to fulfill this one wish we were writing on the window. And we wanted to fulfill it preferably with the help of the people we meet. So we tried to talk about our wishes with the passers-by and to convince them to help us. So for example, here you see Katharina, and she before formulated the wish, before I die, I want to fly at a higher game. And with this wish, she convinced people to lift her up all together, like as a group, like you see these people like lifting her up. And in a way, this procedure is quite ambitious. Like all our wishes, on one hand, there's a real attempt to fulfill something which is real, like being lifted up. But there's also, the real attempt in turn may also represent a larger symbolic attempt, like to fly at a higher game. You can also see it as a thing you in a more general direction of life. So it has our wishes were a little bit, had both real concrete things to do, but maybe also a symbolic meaning in it. And yeah, as soon as we considered an action as completed, no matter if it was succeeded or failed, sometimes we really failed, then we walked on while the bus was rolling behind us. So we didn't step again in the bus. And we walked to the next place in the pedestrian area. And as we walked, we again brainstormed about our wishes. And after we stopped at the next square, we also committed to one wish. We wrote it again on the window of the bus. And yeah, the whole thing of brainstorming, getting in direction, which wish is a thing we want to work on, trying to fulfill it in public space, happens 3 times. And there was a tendency that, especially at the last wish, we often involved the audience in the bus to get out of the bus and support us in our wish fulfillment. Yes, and now I will show you little video excerpts from this.
In meinem Leben möchte ich noch mal ganz viel Zeit im Park verbringen und dort einfach nur auf Wiesen herumliegen. Ich möchte noch mal auf dem Dach von irgendeinem Haus sitzen, den ganzen Tag lang und die Zeit verrinnen lassen. Ja? Hört ihr mich?
Ja.
versuche mir gerade meine Wünsche zu erfüllen.
Aha.
Und ein Wunsch ist es, einen Mann zu finden, der genauso gerne und lange küsst wie ich.
Okay. Gehört die Lust dann zu dir, oder?
Ja, die begleiten mich bei meiner Erfahrung.
Ich hab schon und warum machst du das?
Warum?
Mhm.
Naja, weil man ja sonst immer so manche Wünsche so aufschiebt.
Ach so.
Und ich schiebe das jetzt schon so lange auf.
Du schiebst es jetzt schon so lange auf. Ja, und was hat das dann für Konsequenzen für mich?
Keine Ahnung, ich habe jetzt erstmal nur gesagt, ich möchte jemanden finden. Und dann denke ich, muss ich erstmal rumprobieren.
So mit verschiedenen rumprobieren, oder?
Ja, vielleicht bist du es auch schon gleich. Aber ich weiß doch von mir.
Wie lang muss das Küssen denn sein?
Solange du willst.
Solange ich will.
Solange du willst.
Okay. Also es wäre ja schon sehr mutig von mir, wenn ich es jetzt machen würde. Ja, ja. Naja, gut. Aber wehe, dein Lippenstift färbt ab, gell? Okay. Na dann.
Servus.
Wer bist denn du?
Ich bin der Jan Mark.
Hallo. Jan Mike?
Mark, ja.
Mark heißt du?
Ja, ja, also Jean-Marc, nur halt bitte Deutsch.
Schau mal.
Bitte auf Deutsch.
Auf Deutsch?
Ja, das wäre so.
Ah, Jan Mark.
Ja, ganz genau. Wer bist du?
Ich bin Katharina.
Katharina.
Aha, das ist dein Geldbeutel, oder?
Das ist mein Geldbeutel. Das sind andere Dinge, die auch hier...
Zigaretten.
Hi.
Hi.
Was machst du da?
Ich versuche in meinem Leben nochmal mir zu vertrauen.
Und dazu das Mikro, oder was?
Da das Mikro ist dazu da, dass die Leute da im Bus mich auch hören können.
Die Leute im Bus.
Ja, ist da nicht noch ein Bus hier irgendwo?
Nein, da drüben, da ist ein Bus.
Da, ja. Genau. Ja, das sind da Leute? Ja,
Da sind ziemlich viele Leute, ja?
Genau. Das sind die Zuschauer. Ach so. Und du bist?
Ich bin die Mira.
Hi, Mira. War ich bei euch schon mal? Nee.
Aber fast voll.
Fast? Ja.
Ist dann nach links abgebogen, darüber zu dem Restaurant.
Ah, okay. Und was macht ihr hier? Was essen, oder?
Ja.
Ja, er ist gerade.
Ihr habt gar keinen Tisch, oder?
Nee,
Gibt hier gar keinen
fast reingelangt.
ins Essen?
Ja.
Was ist denn das?
Vorsicht. Nudeln.
Ah, chinesische Nudeln.
Vorsicht.
Ah, darf ich ihn probieren?
Warte mal, ich hab sogar noch ein zweites Paar Stäbchen, aber kannst du mir auch zustecken?
Ich versuch's halt.
Da, ein Stäbchen.
Ein Stäbchen.
Da ist der andere.
Aha, muss man das nicht, das muss man zu
führen?
zweit.
Ja, genau.
Für mich.
Pass mal auf, ich gebe sie dir mal gleich in die Hand. So, und jetzt.
Da rein und jetzt zubeißen.
Genau. Und
Hab ich
nehmen.
was?
Ja. Knapp daneben.
Julia? Ja. Gehen wir weiter? Ja. Wo bist du? Okay, gehen wir weiter.
Einer meiner Wünsche ist ja, sinnvolle Zeichen zu setzen. Also sinnstiftende Zeichen zu setzen. Und ich dachte, wir könnten da so Fahrräder nehmen und die auf die Straße stellen, eine Ampelschaltung lang, als Zeichen für eine Fahrradstadt. Hilfst du mir? Nur eine Ampelschaltung lang. ich lasse Sie gleich in Ruhe. Hallo.
Hallo.
Ich würde gerne sinnstiftende Zeichen setzen. Und ich habe mir jetzt eins ausgedacht. Wir könnten da diese Fahrräder nehmen und sie eine Ampelschaltung lang auf die Straße stellen.
Nee, das machen wir ganz sicher.
Ganz sicher nicht? Wieso? Das ist nur ganz kurz, dann bringen wir alles wieder zurück.
Nee, ich glaube was, das machen wir jetzt nicht.
Nein?
Das ist keine gute Idee.
Haben Sie vielleicht Lust?
Für sowas bestimmt nicht.
Für sowas nicht. Schade. Ja, danke schön. Ach so. Eine. Also, sagen wir eine Mitte. Egal.
At the end, as I couldn't convince other people from the street to help me stopping the street, I asked the people in the bus to help me, and they were all like motivated to do it. And yeah, as you see, we are allowed ourselves to use the space for other purposes than the usual ones. So normally in public space, it is possible, but it is not so much done, or maybe there's not so much room for quite very specific personal needs or wishes. Yeah, and in a way we would say we co-created public space in this performance by using it for the fulfillment of personal wishes. And yeah, I would also say as a statement or a manifest, also very personal wishes are allowed to to be fulfilled in public space, or the public space is also there to fulfill very personal needs. Yeah, and yeah, the work was shown in Erlangen and Braunschweig in Germany, and 2011 in Zurich and in Lausanne in Switzerland. And as well, we showed it in Bat Yam in Israel, where it was a quite different experience, as people were very much more open to participate in everything we were proposing, as society there is maybe more used to get a lot in contact in public space. Yeah, so far from the first work. Now I pass on to Katharina.
I want to introduce now the performance Releaser in Animality. We developed the performance in 2014 when we were invited for a residency, a 1 month long residency from the art space Lothringer 13, not Auheidhausen, but Florida, in Auheidhausen in Munich. And living and working there, we were confronted with a very nice and tidy, clean, rich neighborhood, actually. You can also say it was a gentrified district somehow, and where we had the impression that the people have made it themselves very comfortable and beautiful to live there, where probably less wealthy people cannot make a living anymore, or are rarely to be found, and homeless people actually have been removed probably, and anything wild, unpredictable and uncontrollable we couldn't find there during the time when we were living there. So from this experience of the quarter, we got the need to enrich the space with what we were missing on site, and that was animality, corporality, sweat, dirt, volume, and sensuality. So we began to invent exercises for specific sites in public space, which have the potential, if you do them, exceed them for 5 minutes at least, that you can rediscover your own animalistic side. So, and each exercise we combined a movement, a repetitive movement with a sound. For example, we were rolling on the sidewalk, and at the same time we were crying out, ah, ah, or we were rattling the fences of a building, and at the same time we were crying out, wah! So in the beginning of the performance, or for the performance, we were dressing up in very nice and gallant clothes, like the fashion style that you can also find of the people in the hood. And then we met with the audience in front of the art space. We started the tour there, and we passed around a bowl with mud, and we invited the audience to put some of the mud to their faces, as we also did before. And then we started off to go for a parkour to different sites. And we invited also the audience to join the proposed exercises to experience, reintegrate animalistic behaviors. Everything what we found has become excluded on site. So now I want to show you a video excerpt of the performance.
Okay, dann ziehen wir los. Das hier ist der Ort, wo wir die allererste Übung machen. Die erste Übung ist im Kreis laufen, mit den Händen die Hände mitbewegen und ja. Wenn ihr mitmachen wollt, kommt zu uns, dann stellen wir uns hier in den Kreis. Und wenn wir das Zeichen bekommen von unserem dann geht's los. Ja? Läuft? Okay.
Hier machen wir die zweite Übung an diesem Ort, an diesem Zaun rütteln, ohne ihn kaputt zu machen und dabei Ha mit der Stimme machen. Jeder, der mitmachen möchte, komm mal mit zu dem Zaun. Auch wieder mit. Geht's los? Ja.
So these were like 3 of the 6 exercises that we executed there with the audience, or in the end, more or less with less audience. We started with more people, and then in the end, when it became more challenging, less people were joining. And yeah, as you can imagine, through our exercises, we were not only reawakening our own animality, but used the public space also differently from the structure which was established. Kind of, we were shook the structure of the place, I had a feeling. So for example, in the exercise, we were moving around loudly, aggressive and spacious instead of quiet and customized, or we rolled on the sidewalk instead of walking there. We licked the ATM that you did not see now in the excerpt, and instead of getting some money from it, we were playing ecstatically with the water of a fountain instead of just watching the nice water play, for which it was meant for, probably. So in this way, we were extending the possibilities of how to behave in the quarter, and were co-creating public space. And besides Munich, we were also performing the Release Your Inner Animality 2016 in Bochum. So now I pass on to Julia.
Okay, I will shortly present a younger work, Playing Around, performance we developed last year in cooperation with a temporary gallery already. And it was a time where already Corona was going on, but the situation last summer was not so hard, so everything was more relaxed and possible to perform. And yeah, but also in this work we tried to contrast in a way our quite crisis-ridden present with very light-hearted and joyful play, I would say. And I again show shortly some you see us that we arrived the gallery in business dresses and greeted our waiting audience, and we directly closed our eyes and recite a kind of manifest about a little bit everything we want to get rid of from now on. So we say no expectation, no rating, no intention, no plan, no objective, no pressure, no power, no significance, no theory, no past, no future. So a little bit everything which is somehow controlling, we wanted to get rid of. And then after that, we started a kind of a quite ecstatic action, or you can call it like a dance to transform ourselves in another consciousness. So we shake. And while we shaked, we also changed our outfits. So now we had very easy clothes, which makes us easy to, or dresses, which makes us easy to move. And we also freed our voice, maybe a little bit similar to the performance release here in Animality, like, yeah, get everything from which is stuck out of the voice. And we put off our shoes, and from there on we performed bare feet, everything afterwards. And with this kind of transformative dance, we tried to shake off our upbringing in a way, I would say. We tried to get back to a kind of childlike side of us. Yeah, that is from now on what we wanted to follow, were more spontaneous impulses, to be more in the now, to let out and articulate emotions very directly. We wanted to be more honest with ourselves and the environment, and above all, come back to the idea of play more. Yeah, and after this transformation, or after this transformative dance, we go randomly in any direction. So this was not scripted or planned, and the audience was following us. And again, the audience is equipped with headphones and could listen to what we say over the radio. Yeah, and then we improvised actions just with the things we found. So objects, materials, situations became our spontaneous toys and our inspiration. For example, here you see the bushes became the forest, and as we were in the bushes, we became dangerous animals in the forest. And we played that. Or the bushes became a hiding place when playing hide and seek, for example. Or here you see us after we found some clothes on bulky waste, and they became capes for kings. And yeah, and then because we became kings ourselves, we chased somebody away from the ping pong table and played around with their bats. So we also, yeah, we get transformed by the things we found. And I will also shortly show you the trailer of this performance. Okay. Naja.
Kein Druck.
Auf die Plätze, fertig, los.
Keinen Plan. Keine
Okay,
Absicht.
ich schmeiß mir den Motor an. Okay.
Keine
1, 2, 3.
Erwartung.
Und los geht die Fahrt.
Keine Bedeutung. Keine Bewertung.
Wir kommen. Brumm, brumm.
Kein Ziel.
Okay, ich bin der Motor. Brumm, brumm. Wir kommen.
Kein Urteil.
Brumm, brumm.
Keine Macht.
Links. Brumm. Linker.
Keine Theorie. Keine Bedeutung. Keine Vergangenheit.
Wir klauen die Mülltonne. Diese Müllverbrecher.
Keine Zukunft.
Drinnen.
Kein Stress.
Okay.
Kein Druck. Kein Ehrgeiz. Keine Ambition. Keine Manipulation.
Nein, da links.
Kein Ziel. Kein Müssen.
Oh, Entschuldigung.
Kein Sollen.
Country roads, take me home to the place I belong. West Virginia, Mountain Mamas, take me home. Country roads.
or I just want to conclude that as you may probably see, in this work we try to see the city from a different perspective, and the perspective is everything can become a playground. So the city itself becomes a playground. Yeah, this was a little bit the idea of this work.
So now I will just, in the end, from our presenting these 3 works connected to, in our sense, connected to co-creating public space, I want just to carve out how we specifically co-create public space in these performances. So we look at public space and see that people use it normally very customized according to what the public space is intended for. For example, in the shopping mall or in the shopping area, there people normally just shop. But actually, like also Joanna Kusiak was saying, public space is and remains a space that belongs to everyone, and thus to a certain extent as well to ourselves. And the rules of how to behave in public space, once created by our society, are not fixed, but can be questioned, rediscussed, and also changed. So in our performances, we somehow use this possibility to co-create public space by implementing other behaviors, most of all different from the standard ones, and like that wish to enrich public space by doing so. For example, in Release Your Animality, we introduce animalistic behaviors that we miss on site. In Before We Die, we use the public space as a place to fulfill our personal wishes. And in Playing Around, we transform the public space in our playground and play with the things we find there. By behaving different from what is common in public space, we not only exhibit the already existing structures on site, but make visible the potential lying there and how different the space could be used actually. And we hope that this encourages people who watch us, maybe the audience or the passersby, to co-create public space as well, or at least provide another experience of the very known public space for the people.
And maybe also notice some aspects of it that require change, that of course cannot, in the performance itself, it is very temporary change, but maybe if it's carried by others, by activist movements and so on, then maybe it can be more permanent. So we had a very interesting questions from Joanna, and that I would really like to come back to. I found very, maybe if I just mention this more activist perspective on public space, I find it quite interesting what you said, very interesting what you said, Joanna, that about expanding this power of the performance, because I have a feeling like, for example, when you get on this this crate, you know, in the very posh district of Munich, and when you start to move it, you know, if 100 people did that, it could be a very powerful manifesto of the attitude towards public space. Yeah, so I'm interested in, like, do you think about this kind of like possible collaborations with activists? Would you ever perform as a part of a demonstration, or it's rather you consciously want to stay away from that? Because we know a lot of interesting examples of performance artists cooperating, at least occasionally, with right to the city movements or in general political movements. Like, what is your attitude towards this kind of a more political action? Like, would you embed your performance into that, or rather not, rather keep distance?
I personally feel that it's not my point of doing in society to like enlarge it on this large scale and to start an activistic movement and also organizing it. But I'm very likely, or I'm happy or open that other people just take our ideas or what we were introducing into public space and then make it bigger and larger. And I have also this feeling that's how it is in art, that some artists are first putting some ideas, maybe in museums or maybe in public space, and then other people pick it and make it more public for the people to more join them. Yeah, I am personally more interested to, first of all, find new ways of how to behave and implant them before this starting to become huge and big.
Yeah, I would agree to this, but I also see the potential, or I also like the idea, especially Release Your Inner Animality is a work. I can read it as a action and performance which tries to with just getting against gentrification, and I like it that I can read this into this, but I'm not forced to read this into this. So I like the openness. Maybe this is more an artistic, that not like, if you put a sign next to us to an action, like, okay, you are on a fence and doing this, and then there's a sign where it's written, we hate gentrification, then people see it and everything is clear and obvious, and then you can maybe get you can have you already have your political statement or thoughts about it. But if it's not so precisely defined or more open what it is about, you have, as a perspective, as an audience, a more open view on it. So this is something I like. So it has. I can imagine in the future, if the gentrification is getting worse and worse, I would participate at an action like that, of course, so I can imagine this quite well. But I also like to just try out things, or have this freedom as an artist to try out things.
Because for someone it could be less about it would be about division between private and public, and how it is changed and what is allowed from the private in the public, which now is really also quite interesting topic on itself. But because I wanted a bit refer to what Joanna said, what would happen if someone got rid of this label of the performance? Would it destroy it or bring to another level? That somehow when it becomes a part of a demonstration, then of course it's rather like a statement, and this multi-layered is lost for a social or political goal. But
my impression was also, in this sense, maybe I read it well, because my impression was that you're definitely not trying to expand it into political, but it's more this Foucauldian technique of the self. It is also about this more expanding inner space. So I can imagine that you're doing it for yourself also, in certain sense, like very personally for yourself, to just expand your own repertoire of what you can allow yourself, and it is a form of personal liberation. That's how I read it. And in this sense, just turning into political action will be just replacing one label with another, just replacing the art label with the politics label. But the question of course, if we start from the perspective what I allow myself to do, then the question what I allow myself to do as an artist is a different than what I just allow myself to do, full stop. Not in my mode of an artist, but in general in life.
Yeah, and also it influences. I mean, like what you said, when we were living there in this gentrified quarter of Munich, we really also moved differently, perhaps, of moving in another quarter, and also felt the restrictions, perhaps, from the quarter. And then by freeing them in the performance, we got rid in this moment of performance, but it also has its effects and influences in the private life after that. So it's not just enlarging our behavior, our possibility of behavior in the performance, but on a smaller scale, perhaps it's also then different after that for us moving there and already having opened up the space of what is possible there. So yeah, I feel after that more released in a way also to do other things after performing it.
And also the audience, because very often after performances, there is a conversation about what happened during the performance. And I noticed that there is a specific mood that very often the audience feels more liberated, and it's very, very pleasant. It's like giving you some sense of agency concerning that sometimes maybe is lost when you analyze how public space work, all these powers that is exercised upon us. So maybe this maybe also could be even interpreted politically, that this is something that from which a more political action could arise. Yeah, that you first have to have this feeling that you are capable of influencing that.
Yeah, absolutely, because in the end, it's about forms of subjectivity. So if you transform your subjectivity, also new things are becoming possible, and that as such is political. So yeah, it's about expanding the repertoire of the inner.
Joanna, I wanted to also ask you, because you worked and lived in different countries, and for me it's of course interesting, like coming from Poland to Germany. I ask myself many times, like I have a feeling that public space works a bit differently in Germany than in Poland. And of course I don't want to spread stereotypes, because it's very complex, depends on the type of the city and type of the district, of course. But I was kind of wondering what you think about that. Did you have your own observations living in different countries? Because in Germany, and it's also visible in performances, if you enter a space that is more private, very often the reaction is immediate and you are being, pushed away. And I have a feeling that here it's kind of more controlled or defined, but I don't know, maybe I'm totally wrong, but I wanted to ask you.
Well, I guess it does depend on the city, and I have to say that in Germany, I only lived in Berlin, which is a very separate case, because it's not the German city, but it's also an international city, and it has its own vibe. And so as such, I would say in Berlin, you can do a lot before attracting someone's attention, definitely more than in other German cities. If comparing it to Poland, I think that, well, on the one hand, like I think in Berlin you have this different entry, because, as I said, you can do a lot before people even bother to notice, because there's so many people, different cultures, actual crazy people, artists, so people are used to some sort of weird events in public space, which in some sense can be seen also as disadvantage, because that means that, yeah, you have a bigger threshold, right? I mean, to really come up with something new or come up with something engaging. I think in Poland, maybe the interface is a little bit more controlling, in the sense maybe people also, in comparison to Berlin, wouldn't join it quickly, but then after they join, they would go further. That would be my speculation, purely speculation, that, the entry bar is bigger, but once they join like in a more crazy way. Like that would be my speculation, yes.
Yeah, and perhaps to come back to your first question, Joanna Kusiak, what if a person joins our performance and then starts to become more crazier and more liberated than we do? We never really experienced it during these 14 years of doing performances. Besides one case, and perhaps Julia, you can help me also, but there was one case that I remember, that was a guy, it was during the performance After Sunset, who really used the space for his own performance, let's say. And he really was so much activated perhaps by us behaving and using the possibilities of the evening, what is possible there, that he was like going over us a little bit, I would say. But then also we created this space intentionally that he could do that in a way. So we kind of integrated him again, and then we went we go on, and I had the feeling that it was not disturbing the performance, but it was just like, yeah, it was like a side performance which we integrated then. So I think in this way we could handle it very well. And besides then, I don't remember that somebody was overactivated, because I all the time think that we are already like, when you really are in the situation and you feel the people and the space around, that we are already on the edge of what we can do in this moment. So people who watch us, maybe our audience, our passersby, they are more or less ashamed, or sometimes ashamed, sometimes they take more distance, because in most of performance they can choose the distance, how far and how close they want to be. And if really somebody is into, okay, I want to put myself into the highlight, then he's joining in our our propositions, actually, but so not going over it so much.
Yeah, I would also agree, or I also think I really liked in Joanna Kusiak's words, where like there's a training of intentionally power. So it's not unintentionally. So, and what we do before we do a performance is rehearsing a lot, or talking about it a lot. So, so yeah, what we try to do is not totally, but we try to behave in a way also quite intentionally, and with reason, as you also marked out. And I feel with that maybe more prepared for this performance, and people who just join, they are a little bit in a weaker position, or maybe they behave less intentionally than we do. So yeah, I guess we are more prepared, but of course there can be people who are quite strong. What we had in this one case.
Or they join with different intention. Probably that's what happens too.
Yeah, this also like we have this is also very often something, or which was, we also said, for example, after not so well experiences, don't interact too much with youngsters and children, or with people who are under drugs or on alcohol. So especially when there are people very drunken, they have, I don't know, I have a mission or an intention I want to do, and then the other person maybe gets very sexual, and it was not my thing at all, or I don't know, gets up with very, with topics I cannot control, or I also don't want to, how would you say this, show this person maybe who was not aware of him or herself to the audience. So it's nicer to have someone who's consciously there and can say yes or no, or it's like an equal contact in a way.
And also they notice very often that because the micros are not hidden, so it's like it's not a hidden camera, you know, everyone knows what's going on. Yeah, and that's but I have to say I'm always really fascinated with how easily some people interact with you. Like very often you have this kind of a long interactions, and I'm kind of wondering, of course you are a bit privileged there, you are this two young beautiful white woman, you know how to speak to people and so on, so you're using this privilege. But on the other side, I have a feeling that that interaction in public space, it's much easier than we sometimes maybe think, and I noticed that people like stay with you. Or there was one performance which, as a result, one of the random visitors, so to speak, went with Julia to her family celebration, you know, days after. And sometimes I'm wondering, you know, how to interpret that, you know, that there is maybe a need for interactions in the society that maybe is not fulfilled. I don't know, maybe it's a very strong generalization, but that there is some kind of a need for human, you know, contact that maybe because of the workload, or I don't know, living alone, problems with sustaining friendships is not fulfilled. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's also, like Julia said, it's a training how to create this trustful space to interact with each other and to open up and to find new possibilities together, and to take people with us to do actions which they normally would not do, like from their own motivation, let's say. And through this whole process of each time rehearsing till we come to the performance, we collect like a lot of reactions, how it's not functioning, how it's better functioning. So we have like a kind of a repertoire of how to behave, although it's still really new and everything could happen, but it's not so totally new, because it's we get a really good feeling of how the specific public space is reacting to us, and then we can react again. So we, yeah, this is
you mastered the art of spontaneous conversations in the street, you know, something that maybe many more of us should be practicing, you know, this kind of taking seriously the fact that we just met someone on the train, and even 5 minutes, actually, why not? Yeah. But here I wanted to ask Joanna, because we are approaching end of our discussion, because Joanna expressed this wish to collaborate, which I find amazing, and I totally understand you, because after each performance I want to collaborate with Katze and Krieg, and it works. And I also wanted to ask you, because I can imagine that you also in your work you also approach some themes that you maybe might think they could be good themes for artists, you know, some painful places concerning art space, public space, some issues, you know, that are like underexplored, that need some kind of artistic confrontation. I don't know if something comes to your mind. Now you are working with very difficult legal issues that I don't know if it can be inspirational for any performance, but I kind of wanted to ask you, because I remember many years ago I was in Krakow and I was curating my first bigger curatorial project called After Capitalism, and I met with city activists, and they told me, Aneta, it's so bad, give us artists, send us artists, let's do some stuff in public space, no one is listening to us, you know. And they were, and now the situation really changed, and I think it's much better. But somehow I have a feeling maybe, yeah, these collaborations of artists with scientists could be very, very interesting, very fruitful, because maybe you already encountered something that would benefit from the artistic research, or I don't know. I know it's a difficult question, but
well, I mean, yeah, I think, you know, I do a lot of activism as activism. Right now, I'm also an activist with Deutsche Wohnen Co. enteignen. That's a big movement in Berlin that, right, actually now last Thursday, we passed the signatures to the municipality of Berlin, and there will be a referendum in September to expropriate public housing. However, but in some sense I was drawn maybe to Katze and Krieg work precisely for what it is and not what it could be politically, for this potential of expanding inner spaces rather than just being directly employed for activist purposes, or this indirect link that it is for expanding the subjectivity. You in the end maybe also discover the new political possibilities, but it's not in this very utilitarian way that let's use art to move ahead political agendas. It's more subtle in a way, and it's thought more as a subjective long-term process. So yeah, that's why I also ask how you come up with the ideas for the next performance. I mean, how does it emerge? Because I can imagine if we were to collaborate, there would be more of a joint process of coming up with the ideas rather than just me throwing something or just
yeah. We work with experiences. Actually, we are together. We experience not in the during the performance, but also can happen during another rehearsing of a performance, or we are together in private life and experience a certain situation, I would say. And then there's happening something because we are already perhaps behaving kind of different to usually. And this takes our attention and we find it's interesting. And from this specific experiences, we try to configure or reconstruct the frame and make it bigger perhaps, or make it more clear. And and we rehearse how to gain again this experience, or this what we found interesting in this experiencing, and then to show it to the audience. So it's not a and then of course we think about it, we talk about it, we make a tryout, then we see what's not happening very good and that's going into another way, and then we try it out again. So it's kind of a very practical, a very not a very conceptual way that we create the performance, and starts from a real what was touching us in a certain moment, I would say.
Or maybe you can also say it is a bit like we try to feel or see or react on what is there laying in the space. And in the space, it's not only general topics, it could be also personal topics. So for example, in these days after our studies, where we had lots of wishes and were in this personal mood of we want to have new directions in our lives, then comes up this performance. But also I also see it on a very high scale. For example, when we developed Release Your Inner Animality, we were in this very, very nice quarter in Munich, but there was a war going on in this year, like in Syria, and I also, when it is a work, it is referring, this is maybe also what I meant with the openness. It is referring maybe to gentrification, but also on a very, very high scale on gentrification, which was also happening these days. It felt a little bit, okay, very, very far away, this war is happening, and now we bring a little bit war there, like with this, or some aggressions or extreme feelings maybe. So also, it was also something which was lying in the space, but more, and I get contact with this in a way. I read news or anything. So, but at the same time, we had some problems with our relationships in these days. So there was also personal aggressions. So I really feel like, okay, things which are lying in the space, they are personal and political. And these we try to grab.
I got the sense that there's a sense of, there was my suspicion too, that it's a, the idea is coming from being present in a certain space and in a certain conjuncture, also personal conjuncture and so on. And in this sense, one cannot almost pre-plan too much, that it comes out also from the moment, space, and the possibilities that are, because I think, if one thinks about intentional power of transforming space, this only works if you're also present and able to understand what is already there, because the presence of things that are already there is also a form of power that you can use and, or redirect to new directions, right? I mean, if there wasn't a fence there, you couldn't shake the fence, and so on and so on. So it's always coming from being present with all the elements, that or at least as many elements as possible. And the more elements you notice, both inside yourself and in the space, the more new possibilities in the end you're gonna discover. So if we were to collaborate, which of course I should formally ask you for consent, right? Because I'm trying to do what you're trying to do now, right? I'm trying to convince random people to do something with me. So here you go. I'm not drunk, also just to, check the boxes of what's, and over 18 and not drunk. So it's good in the sense, but the way I would imagine it would be just to choose a space and then just see what happens, right? Or just come up with the idea. So something like that, rather than pre-designing too much.
Yeah.
Expectations. Yeah.
So we have to invite you, Joanna, to Cologne. Hopefully the pandemic will be tamed, or we come to Berlin just to spend a lot of time together. But anyway, thank you so much, Joanna, for your openness and generosity with time and really your insights. I made a lot of notes, and I will be thinking about it about them for the next months, I'm sure. And yeah, I hope we can also in future interact without the mediation of Zoom. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for your interest and for your. We come back to you later. Great, thank you.